There are moments in history where power does not fall with a battle or a public execution, but instead disappears behind locked doors, where the world is no longer allowed to look. One of the most unsettling examples is the fate of a boy king caught inside the French Revolution. Born into absolute monarchy and destined for a throne that collapsed beneath him, he was not killed in the public spectacle often associated with revolution. Instead, he was confined, isolated, and slowly worn down by conditions designed to erase him without creating a martyr. His story is not only about a child in prison, it is about how a political system can make a person vanish while still alive. Let's watch. A child born into a crumbling kingdom, Louis Charles, later known to royalists as Louis XVII, was born in 1785 at the Palace of Versailles. At birth, he was the second son of King Louis XVII and Queen Marie Antoinette, placed within one of the most powerful monarchies in Europe. At that moment, France still appeared stable from the outside, but internally it was already under enormous strain. The country was suffering from debt, inequality, and political unrest. Within a few years, these pressures would erupt into the French Revolution. For Louis Charles, this meant that his childhood unfolded inside a kingdom that was already beginning to fracture. He was raised with royal expectations, but the foundation beneath those expectations was collapsing in real time. By the time he was a young child, France was no longer the secure monarchy he was born into. It was a nation moving toward radical transformation. Revolution reaches the palace. In 1789, the French Revolution officially began with the storming of the Bastille. What started as protests over taxation and inequality quickly turned into a full political revolution against monarchy itself. The royal family was forced to leave Versailles and move to Paris, where they were placed under increasing surveillance. For Louis Charles, this shift marked the end of a protected royal childhood. He was no longer simply a prince being educated for future rule. He had become part of a political crisis. By 1792, the monarchy was officially abolished. King Louis XVII was stripped of power, arrested, and declared a traitor to the revolution. The execution of the king and collapse of the family. In January 1793, Louis XVII was executed by guillotine in Paris. The execution was public, symbolic, and meant to permanently end monarchy in France. Months later, Marie Antoinette was also executed after a highly public trial. These deaths left Louis Charles as the remaining male heir of the Bourbon dynasty. For royalists outside France, he became Louis V in name, even though he had never been officially crowned. Inside revolutionary France, however, he was no longer considered royalty. He was now viewed as a political prisoner whose existence could still inspire counter-revolutionary movements. Transferred to the Temple prison after the execution of his father, Louis Charles was separated from his mother and sister and placed under strict custody in the Temple Tower in Paris. The Temple was not an ordinary prison. It was a fortified medieval complex used specifically for high-value political prisoners. Here his environment changed completely. He was no longer surrounded by court attendants or royal education. Instead, he was guarded by revolution-appointed officials whose primary responsibility was control and isolation. Over time, even his remaining family connections were removed. His mother was executed, and his sister was eventually exchanged in a prisoner's swap years later. Louis Charles remained alone. At this stage, the boy was no longer part of a family or court. Life inside isolation, conditions inside the temple, deteriorated over time. Historical accounts suggest that Louis Charles was kept in increasingly restrictive conditions. His access to outside communication was limited, and his interactions were controlled by guards assigned to monitor him. He was reportedly placed under the supervision of individuals tasked with Republican education, meaning they were expected to reshape his identity away from monarchy. In practice, this created psychological pressure and emotional isolation. What makes this period especially significant is the contrast between his identity and his environment. He had been born into ritual, ceremony, and structure, but now lived in silence, confinement, and uncertainty. Psychological and physical decline. Over time, reports from the temple suggest that Louis Charles became withdrawn and unresponsive. Whether this was caused by illness, neglect, emotional trauma, or a combination of factors remains debated by historians. But what is clear is that his condition worsened significantly. By 1795, his health had severely declined. He likely suffered from a combination of untreated illness and the effects of prolonged isolation. In environments like the temple, where sanitation and medical care were limited, even minor illnesses could become fatal. There is also evidence suggesting that his emotional state deteriorated. Isolation from family, lack of normal childhood interaction, and constant surveillance created conditions in which psychological distress was unavoidable. Death inside the temple. On 8 June 1795, Louis Charles died at the age of 10 while still imprisoned in the temple. The official cause of death was recorded as illness, commonly believed to be tuberculosis. However, historians agree that his weakened condition was the result of extended neglect and confinement. His death was not publicly announced in the dramatic manner often associated with royal executions. Instead, it was documented internally by revolutionary authorities. He was buried in a common grave, without royal recognition or ceremony. What makes his death historically significant is not only the fact that he died in captivity, but that his death was quiet. Aftermath and political uncertainty. Even after his death, uncertainty surrounded the fate of Louis XVII. Rumors spread that he had been secretly removed from the temple or replaced by another child. These rumors led to multiple claimants in later years that falsely identified themselves as the lost king. This uncertainty reflects the emotional and political weight of his disappearance. In revolutionary France, the death of a royal child was not just a personal tragedy, it was a symbolic event that could influence political legitimacy. For royalists, the uncertainty allowed hope to survive. Memory, symbolism, and historical meaning. Louis XVII's story remains powerful not because of what he did, but because of what was done to him. He never ruled, never commanded armies, and never made political decisions. Yet his existence became deeply political because of what he represented. He embodied the final fragile link in a collapsing monarchy. His removal from public life symbolized the revolution's complete rejection of inherited power. His death in isolation reflected how revolutions can eliminate symbols without public confrontation. At the same time, his story raises difficult historical questions about how societies treat prisoners, children, and political symbols during periods of extreme change. The life of Louis XVIII is not remembered for battles or rulings, but for absence, confinement, and a slow disappearance inside a locked tower. His story shows how political revolutions can transform a child into a symbol, and then erase that symbol through silence rather than spectacle. Unlike kings who die on battlefields or scaffolds, he faded within walls that kept the world out. His fate reflects a deeper truth about power. It does not always need violence to remove someone from history, it only needs isolation and time. What remains today is not the story of a ruling king, but of a boy who never had the chance to become one. Let us know in the comments what you think about the boy king locked away until he slowly died. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more captivating content on our YouTube channel.